Welcome back to the Audible Angle. We got a kind of a surprise, unscheduled potpourri episode for you this evening. We couldn't let the national championship game go by without having a little Cignetti swag party. I went and rustled up the only red shirt I could find that was both clean and fit relatively well. So that took a while. Well, of course, we got Urbs back in here. Got some new things. As always, subscribe on YouTube, follow on iTunes or Spotify. Give us a follow at Audible Angle on X too. Very low content right now. Just kind of got that going. We'll use that to interact a little more fluently with people that aren't in the comments. But, consider finding us there. We'll post this stuff once we figure out how to do that on X as well. And, get your questions into the finalists, and we'll try to steer you right. We doubled your 401k once and also doubled whatever irresponsible loan you took out. That's as long as I can hold Irby off. Irby, take us through Monday night. Indiana, they did not get to 60. They did not cover a 30-point spread, as you might have suggested, but I can't imagine you had any disappointment whatsoever.
No, you got that right, Dilly. Was a nice game to watch, to be honest. Maybe obviously slightly surprising on my side of the things, but I'll be honest, first half kind of went as expected. I kind of predicted that it may be a slow start. I think Drew and yourself also kind of concurred with that. Both of you had mentioned that Miami was going to try to slow the pace down, which they successfully did. At the end of the day, I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong. I personally was not surprised at how that went, how it ended. I think the right team won. I think it's great to be alive in 2026 when the second all-time team in college football finished undefeated, winning the national championship. Let's give a shout out to all the remaining players from 1894, the Yale team that won undefeated and won the national championship. I'm sure there's a couple listeners out there that probably played for Yale on that team. So shout out to you guys from 1894. Nice work. I know there's a lot of 127, 130-year-old people out there, so nice work. And, man, you're looking good for 107 years old.
The last and only ever 14-0 team, the Yale smart guys. And how did they ever end up playing 14 games that year? We always think that's a new thing where we're adding games and adding playoffs. Somehow Yale managed to play 14 games in 1894. I wonder how many, I suppose we could have looked up their schedule. I would be surprised if there's box scores. I'm guessing there's run heavy, but every once in a while you get a little surprised when you look back in time. One thing that stood out for me early, not to jump right into game action here, we'll get to celebratories for Indiana and the boys. But what jumped out to me early, Malachi, don't call me Kadarius, Tony. I don't actually know if there's any relation there, but this guy, I believe they said he's 18 still, and it was clear from the get-go he was going to be one of the primary weapons, and they were feeding him the ball, waiting for stuff to happen, and Indiana kind of held him in check, and then, he just stayed steady in huge moments and finally broke one that really kept the game close, over a period of time where Miami needed to find a way to score to keep pace there a little bit, and they got it. They got it. Oh, that was a pretty late touchdown. 6:37 left in the fourth quarter before they got one in, and that was when you knew everybody was going to be around for the full game. What were your thoughts on Miami? Did they do anything unexpected?
Yeah, I don't. Well, how would I put it this way? They did what we expected. They pressured Fernando. Mendoza. They did a good job of that, and I think that wasn't what was unexpected. We expected them to lean heavily on their, their first round picks, I think, on the edges. I think they're both shoe-in first rounders. Their tackles are probably gonna be in the first 3 rounds. That defensive line was their strength, we all knew it. They went after them. What I was surprised at, Dilly, to be honest, is the inconsistency and maybe how they were able to get to Fernando and how maybe the front line from Indiana didn't hold up at least long enough for him to throw the ball. I mean, when you see a line for Mendoza in a game, 16 of 27, 11 incompletions, that's 2 times more than he had in both games coming into this. His stat line with 186 yards wasn't too surprising because that's kinda that efficient, not needed too much because they can lean on the two-headed monster of running backs that they use, and that was there too. It was a very controlled first half, a very controlled first half. I thought that on both sides, the defenses did what they needed to do, right? Like they kind of held people in check. There wasn't a lot of big plays. First half was fun to watch. It was really a national championship that nobody really wanted. It was a chess game, right? Like nobody really wanted to do anything big. They didn't want to take too big of chances. Nobody wanted to turn it over. And that's why we saw 10-0. Now in the second half, things just said coaches, I think, were like, you know what, let's go and win this thing, or we're going to try to win this thing, win or lose. I was really impressed with Malachi Tony. I was even more impressed with Indiana's defense and their game planning in the first half. They had two guys around him each time. It got a little bit looser, and I don't know if that was more about the Indiana defense getting loose or maybe the Miami offense getting a little more creative to get him in one-on-one situations. But I'll tell you right now, his future is bright in this day and age of college football. I don't know if his future is bright for real long in the college football ranks. Being a young kid, maybe he'll obviously stick around for another year. A lot of questions that come to mind that I'm really interested in. I'm going to throw one back at you, Dilly, unscripted here. Is Miami, and this is a question on the national media, I just want to see from us, is Miami here to stay, number one? And what I mean here to stay, we can't have another 20 years that they don't do anything, right? They were basically non-existent for 15, 20 years on the national stage. Obviously, they were decent. And then the second one is what Cignetti that is building there. Is that is that going to be a long reach? It sounds like he has no point, no want to go to the NFL. He had his NFL choice about 26 years ago. He had his chance. He said no. Little kind of a local connection there that we both know about. We can talk about that if we want. But those two questions, I'm interested in your thoughts. Is Miami going to be able to sustain this level with their coaching staff and their players? And then is Indiana going to be able to? I mean, I don't. I'm not saying Dilly with Indiana 16-0 because that's probably an unrealistic thing. It's 2 times in over 100 years that it's happened. So, what do you think? Miami there to stay, and is Indiana going to be able to keep the success?
I would actually argue a little bit here that Miami, if we're looking at several years, I would almost say Miami has a little easier road to staying in the playoff hunt. They have, you think teams like Clemson are going to be back. There's going to be tough teams in the ACC. This year, the champion of the ACC wasn't in the playoff somehow. It's goofy stuff. But I think they maybe have a little bit easier road to run it up 10, 11 wins a little more consistently. They got some spotlight back on their program in a weird sort of way. As we talked about Malachi Tony, the one that I wanted to say, well, he might not leave for the NFL super early, but he might leave Miami and go somewhere else. But the odd thing is that they missed that transfer portal. Perhaps that saved them a couple of transfers by winning these games and extending it past the portal. They weren't even thinking that. But I think Cristobal has that kind of personality too that will help in recruiting and keeping players. So they might have an easier road and an easier conference to stay relevant in. Indiana, to some degree, you know, it's not exactly, a small town, kind of feels small time Indiana, big time underdog makes good. They got big money and, they had to execute the plan. They had transfers, they have NIL money, but to keep that up, I mean, they have a lot of restocking to do. They're just talked about a lot. They got an older team. Now, who knows with the NCAA? Maybe they'll just start letting players play for 8 years. We don't know what could happen, but they're just from attrition. I think they're going to have a bit more to replace. Um, I say all that, and then you mentioned the two first round picks on the at least on the defensive line for Miami. If those guys are gone, suddenly that's a major elite strength of their team that they had to rely on that they have to replace. But I would suspect that they're going to have some momentum and a little easier path than of go staring down a fully loaded Ohio State again, a perhaps revitalized Michigan, a determined Oregon, and pick your upstart team out of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, whoever else. They're going to have 4 or 5 tough games. And while you give your thoughts, I'm going to take a little peek at the schedule for next year.
Yeah, I think there's question marks on both sides, and there's one big question mark that actually matches both teams. I mean, Carson Beck was a very big part of the success this year for Miami. His line in that final game I thought was pretty impressive. Obviously, having Malachi Tony in a very even game, like an even keeled game with as far as throwing and running, because Mark Fletcher did a good job on the ground as well. Grabbed 2 touchdowns. Malachi had a touchdown, but Carson Beck was 19 of 32 for almost 250 yards, just shy of that in a touchdown. So he did throw the key interception. That was probably the game, right? That's the dagger. I don't know. He probably throws that anyway, and it really probably didn't matter a ton. He had to take a chance anyway. But so Carson Beck's going to be a big hole to fill. I think Indiana has that same big hole. I mean, it's probably larger, to be honest, but I want to explain why I say probably a bigger hole, because he is the Heisman Trophy winner. And we do know what they have on the bench. They've got another Mendoza coming up. I believe he's a freshman. His brother's a freshman. They're pretty high on him. I think there's another quarterback in between there, though. I think there's also as far as age, I think there's a sophomore or junior on the roster as well, potentially. But I think that other Mendoza is going to get the nod. So that is, but that's a high level to play at. And boy, oh boy, I'll tell you, Fernando Mendoza showed me a lot of stones, if you will, on that diving kind of shook a tackle on a gutsy play by our guy. I mean, and when I say it's Cignetti, that was a real gutsy call on fourth down to run for the number one for the first down, and eventually, I think he obviously well chronicled it into national audience after the game. He said that they figured they'd be in the same defense. They had a call. They worked on it during the week.
Yep.
That tells you, Dilly. I'll be honest. That tells you where that level of coaching comes from. I mean, he's so granular. He looked at the defense, and that's the nice thing about his position is he's not calling plays. He's not calling defense. He's there to watch all that little stuff, and I think that that's something that some of the NFL teams, Matt LaFleur, should be thinking about so that they can just be head coaches and not offensive coordinators. I like his offensive mind, but anyway, to answer your question, I agree with you on Miami. I think Miami has a very or an easier road. I don't think college football is ever easy, but let's be honest. The Big Ten is the best football conference in the country right now. And I think it's only going to get better. It's not going to get worse. And the reason that I say that is we have the national champion again for the third straight year. That shows you that the Big Ten has been around and will be around. And some of the blue bloods from the Big Ten were not showing well lately. I mean, Penn State's in disarray. They should only get better. There's going to be people that want to play for that history there, and a new coach should be able to work that out. Obviously, there's setbacks with a bazillion different things at Penn State. But there's blue bloods like Wisconsin. I mean, in Wisconsin's recruiting class, you got to look at it. It's pretty solid. Top 5 in the country right now with I'm sorry, not recruiting. It's the transfer portal that is top 5 right now, top 10 at least. So they've got a lot of people coming in. I think we're going to see it get deeper on the top. It's going to be more than Michigan, Ohio, Oregon, and Indiana. I think it's also going to include Penn State. I'd really like to think that the Cornhuskers down in Nebraska will get kind of relevant again at some point. Wisconsin should get relevant. I think Minnesota probably isn't that far off, Dilly. Maybe you've got a better pulse than I do, but I think it's definitely Indiana is going to be significant. I don't know if they're going to go that this far, obviously, for another 4 or 5 years. Wouldn't be surprised. It's Cignetti. I'm sure he's got guys that want to play for him. I want to take my last year of eligibility at 47 years old and go play for Cignetti. That's the guy. I call him the John Calipari of college football. That guy can recruit. He's got a message. Let me remind listeners that team just went 16-0, won the national championship without one 5-star recruit, not one guy. And a great deal of guys from JMU, uh, transfers came in, followed Cignetti, and he knew. I mean, this guy knew, and you can call him cocky. You can tell me that he's got a big ego, but he follows it up, man. And there's action there, and he's got it right. He's got the right people around him that buy into him. We'll see how long it goes. I think it is probably a good 5-10 years of success there at Indiana.
Yeah, he did once again firmly squelch any ideas about jumping to the NFL. I did hear on, national media outlets there were some yeah, I can't remember who it was, and I'll apologize to the guy who gives two shits about whether or not I mention him, whoever it was, national big guy. But they were saying any GM that has an open coaching spot, if their first answer to the owner isn't, let's throw $25 million at Cignetti just to give it a shot, if that's not their first choice, they should be immediately fired and they should get a GM in who is at least going to try to take a shot. That's how highly regarded um, he is for some people, but he's been very clear on that not being an option. It'd be hard to imagine him moving on unless, you can't project out 4 years from now if, some of the money dries up or something changes at Indiana and he feels, he's not getting the resources he needs. Potentially that could change, but man, it seems like he's at home. One last thing on just kind of the Miami road for Miami versus the road for Indiana. We didn't mention USC. There's going to be USC, even Washington, maybe some of these former Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever it was called at the time. They're going to get their footing in the Big Ten too. So there's some potential on those teams. But I always think even if you look towards the bottom of these conferences and stuff, and I don't think we even have Miami's exact schedule, but if you're talking about rolling the dice against, Bill Belichick and UNC and Boston College and Cal and Wake Forest, these teams pop up as like okay sometimes. I just think, pick any of the Big Ten teams we mentioned, and you mentioned Minnesota a little bit, same kind of deal with them. I would take them against anything other than the top couple, two or three. And if they had to just play the bottom after Virginia and Miami, hell, leave Duke in there too. If they just played a season against the bottom half of that conference, I think they'd finish on the top of that heap of junk. So tougher road for Indiana. Do we think that what teams that got knocked out? I mean, we can say perennial powers, Georgia, they'll be back in the mix. Is there any of these other teams, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, that you might think will come back again and make another playoff appearance? These aren't annual locks for the playoffs. Do you see another run coming from anybody other than basically Georgia or Ohio State?
Yeah, obviously those are two of the top of the list. They've probably been involved in the college football playoff since it started, right? I do like Texas A&M. I don't know the makeup of the roster. Let's assume that they have relative younger players, sophomore, juniors, and they're not all seniors. You just have to assume that in the transfer portal era that we're in, NIL. So I think that Texas A&M played a game that could be there. I think that I'm very interested, Dilly. the team that I'm very interested in what they're gonna do next, and maybe it depends on what that quarterback does here, if he is actually, deemed a 6th year for that medical red shirt, is Ole Miss. And with that transition from the coaching stuff and all of that, and I'm sure that the mood probably isn't amazing in Ole Miss right now, just with the questions of, where did we go? Where could we have been? All that kind of stuff. But that's a team that was on the rise. But were they on the rise just because of Lane Kiffin? Who knows? Time will tell. So I think that Texas Tech is maybe a bit of more of a stretch for me to keep going. I think they're that All American linebacker, I believe, is a senior, so I think he'll be going to the NFL. I could be misspoken there. He may have one more year, but he also could be going. I mean, he probably is going to take the money just because that's his dream. But I think he's a senior. So I think Texas Tech is probably the reach. I think A&M is probably a lock, but I'm really interested in Ole Miss. The one question I've got for you, Dilly, talking about this national championship is it's interesting to me that Cignetti would even be thought of a pro coach at the ripe old age of 64. And I know that that's not crazy. There's much. I mean, we saw who led the Raiders this year at like 98. But at 64, does he want to still do it? And my biggest question, and I'm really interested. Do you think that his style of coaching, which is really motivational, let's pull together, can we do that? Does that translate to the NFL? I would be apt to say no, but I just because it's guys that are like, I'm here, shut up. I know what I'm doing. Like it's just a different attitude up there versus the guys that he had at Indiana. I don't know, to be honest, Dilly, if he would be as successful at an Ohio State or a big time or Georgia or Alabama, because these are a lot of prima donnas. He didn't have prima donnas. He had guys like Mendoza that were looking for a chance. He got passed over. Bunch of guys that were little guys just looking for a chance. And I'll bust through walls for you because you gave me belief and you gave me want to. And it's a really kind of fun story. I get goosebumps thinking about it because that they won the national championship about this. There will be a Netflix movie, a Prime movie, a big screen movie, hopefully, about this. And I'm sure somebody's already got the rights to it. I'm sure it was Netflix. But man, that's a great story. I'm really happy I lived through it. What a great run.
Yeah, in contrast to whatever big media guy that I didn't recall talking about Cignetti in the NFL, I 100% agree with you. I would have major reservations. We've seen some of this in the past. The transition from college to NFL and NFL to college. Very established guys. There's not a huge track record of it. Nick Saban is the one that comes to mind for most people. But I do feel like there's a type of team that he's able to build, and players that he wants, and you don't get that in the NFL. And there's a level of buy-in, and maybe it wouldn't be immediate, but I feel like the need to validate comes very quick in the NFL. You can't go in, and there's a maybe a narrow range of teams that would work with, but he couldn't go to the Raiders and say, I'm gonna build something up over 3 years. The NFL, the way it's structured, A, doesn't allow that necessarily with contracts and how the draft works. It's not a free for all every year. So he maybe couldn't do a quick turnaround. And then if you're trying to get buy-in for a 3-year program with highly paid professional athletes, you're going to have a mix of vets in there that have done it different ways, and I think it would be a very narrow range of scenarios where it would work out for them. Before we forget, I did actually purposely. I had to do a little research, just more evidence. It's unscripted. We had no plan to discuss other teams. We didn't even really plan on discussing next year, if we're being honest. We just kind of wove our way into that. But Texas Tech did, and I couldn't remember if it was offensive coordinator. It was not. It's new quarterback. They got the number one rated quarterback in the transfer portal. So that does seem like maybe a direct address of their offensive woes that came up in the playoff game. It was like amazing defense, couldn't move the ball. I'd be interesting to see, if that actually pans out and they have a great quarterback and they can keep some, lose some personnel, of course, but keep the defensive system intact and add some offense. That could be an interesting build heading into next year. Um, any other?
Dilly, and that's
I
I
was
wanna
trying to.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna throw in a throwaway and grab Indiana cred because I remember being at the probably seventh or eighth grade at the state basketball tournament in Madison. I did buy an Indiana hat, a flannel hat with an eye. And I told everybody, especially I wore it in college like once or twice, and people were like, "What the hell why are you wearing an Indiana hat?" And I'd be like, "Oh no, it's an I as in me hat." It was a hat about myself, is what I told people. Then I'm sure I threw it away. But what'd you have there to
I wanna
wrap us on college football a
I
little?
wanna Yeah, one quick point there. I wanna just calm down the 17 callers and listeners that'll be getting after us and saying, "Geez Louise, you don't think Cignetti's a good coach?" That our comments are by no means diminishing what he and his team had kinda done here this year. I think he's one of it's obviously a favorite of mine, this whole story, and the reason that it is because it's really just been built. I mean, it's literally this guy is a leader of men, and he got them to do something. I'm sure most of those kids that were playing all those minutes, outside of maybe Mendoza, but I think even him, I don't think that they really truly, if you were to ask him in a dark room, do you really think you can win the national championship? This dude had them all believing, right? In very short order, in 3 short years, he's got the whole state following him. And just to wrap on this, Dilly, we had a question about how many Indiana fans and what kind of a atmosphere it was. I was pretty impressed with the atmosphere. That was a pretty ruckus deal.
Huge.
That wasn't high dollar stuff. Man, Indiana travels. And Indiana travels. Indiana even had left a few at Assembly Hall to pack that joint to watch it on the jumbotron inside as they won. There was a big party there too. But hats off to the followers there. I love Fernando Mendoza and his stuff in his commentary afterwards. I think he puts a lot of work into what he's going to say. It almost gets a little cliche, but I enjoy him listening. Hats off to his family. His old man, I think, is a fucking stud, for hanging by his wife there, who's got MS and challenging that, and he's kind of a stand up dude in that fashion. So great family, great support, good kid. He's going to be successful for a lot of times. I think he just kind of solidified it with his character as that number one pick. There is no question with that number one pick, other than the fact this could be another. This could be another. What was the LSU coach or quarterback? Didn't he say he didn't want to go somewhere? This may be one of those times where a player can choose. I don't want to. Don't pick me because I ain't going there. I ain't signing. That kind of deal. We'll see what happens as it comes up.
It it did seem like Mark Davis he was on site there. It seemed like he was already trying to pave the way for that pick and making everybody get on board with it. Yes, I will reiterate. This was the point of this quick episode was a celebration of Indiana. So, and we just kind of slipped into looking ahead to next year already. This is by far the greatest college football story of our lifetimes, easily. I don't think much compares to it because it just hasn't happened. And if you have better ideas, put forth some comments. Try to make them logical, not just straight up fandom. But it's unbelievable. It's remarkable, and I guess the only way we can disrespect the Cignetti swag is to have any lingering doubts heading into next year and his ability to pull it off then. But there is a long time between now and then, and it's hard to do it again. But man, it was amazing to watch. And as we're Big Ten people, avid Big Ten watchers for a long time. I mean, in people maybe outside don't realize how far down Indiana typically is. A little splash here and there with Antoine Randall L, but that's already probably 25 years ago. They don't pop up on the radar much, even into the middle of the Big Ten. Not certainly not near Iowa and Wisconsin and Northwestern had a run, and Joe Tiller and Purdue had a run, and the Gophers haven't really had a run, but they've been, 10-3 seasons here and there, speckling those in, and Indiana really has not. I'm gonna do a quick record scratch, abrupt change here as we try to bundle in a couple items here. I'm gonna do some rapid fire with the herbs, unprepared as usual. Let's run it down. Did you see, and this is NFL coaches, NFL coaching hires that we've gotten through. Uh, did you see the John Harbaugh opening press conference? We're going to be about football. We like football. We're going to talk about football. Everybody here loves football. You don't love football, you're probably going to go somewhere else. Football, football, football. Um, what do you think of John Harbaugh and the New York Giants?
I don't know. I'll be honest. Actually, I do know. I was very high on Harbaugh to replace our friend Matt LaFleur. Obviously, I've gotten over that. That's a public thing on this. I am now turning over a new leaf. I am pro Matt LaFleur until he makes some first boneheaded decision in the first quarter of the first game next year. With that being said, I don't know that I would necessarily be so high on him after the more thought that went in, and here's why. I think he's more of a general manager of a football team than he is a head coach, if that makes sense. And he's in the head coaching position. I think he's one of those guys that just kind of wants to keep everybody organized, kind of, you go in your role, you do your thing, you go over here, you do your own thing. I'll kind of manage from 60,000 feet in almost like a GM or a president of an organization. Not that I'm belittling any of our presidents out there or CEOs of organizations. Obviously, you do a lot of tough work out there. But my point is, I think that the if I'm being completely selfish here, Dilly, the Packers need some drive and some want to and some energy, more like a Tomlin energy maybe in his prime. Not maybe not today, but potentially Harbaugh 20 years ago or when he started with the Ravens. There was a lot of want to there. I just don't see it from him. I think he just wants to manage a team. And that's probably what he's going to get to do out there. But he's in a head coach, right? And that's not what I would look at as a head coach. So I don't love that hire for the Giants. I think they have a lot of fire in some of their new players once they get healthy. I think Jackson Dart is a guy. I think that running back that had his foot pointed backwards is a guy that can give fire. So I think they've got plenty of players there. Their defensive line is solid as Sears. So I think they're sorted out. As far as player wise, you get Neighbors back from injury. Assume that he's going to do well. I think they'll be successful in the next 2-3 years, but it wasn't what I'd be looking for on a coach. Maybe it's an okay fit there, but it is the New York media, and I think maybe he's doing that on purpose because he doesn't want to get into the New York media thing. He did deal with a lot of East Coast media in Baltimore, but I think they're a different animal in New York.
Yeah, I would generally agree with you. I don't know if I fall for the football talk, but I will say when you think they do have some knuckleheads there, like Cam Scadaboo and Dart is kind of a knucklehead, it might turn out to be an okay fit for that kind of culture. Um, I'm gonna run through a couple more here.
I'll take quicker answers this.
And I'll start with my thoughts here on Stefanski. Not incredibly inspiring, I don't think. I think he is definitely going to have an opportunity to prove it a little bit. He didn't necessarily get a huge upgrade in the quarterback situation with Cousins coming back, presumably, and Penix coming off another torn ACL. He should kind of gravy train into a Bijan Johnson or Bijan Robinson, led offense. And you liked the Atlanta defense throughout the year, and they were splashy. You kind of liked Atlanta down the stretch. You were impressed by them. What do you think of Stefanski, and how much of a chance do they have of kind of jumping right into playoff relevancy?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Stefanski. I wanted him if we were looking for a head coach. I wanted Stefanski. I would have taken him as a defensive coordinator as well. I would have taken him in any position, to be honest. I think he's a great dude. I think he's a great leader. I do believe in the Falcons. I think it's a great fit for Stefanski to be successful very quickly. Watch the Falcons be relevant next year. They will be that relevant that quick. The only caveat to that, Dilly, is they've got a mess on their hands with quarterback. They just do. Their salary cap hell with Cousins. Is he the answer? He's not. Is Penix the answer? Maybe. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think they're successful. I think they're successful quick. They've got weapons. They've got real weapons. Bijan, London, Pitts, defense, good head coach. Throw in anybody. I would actually tell him that the best decision at quarterback right now is somebody that's not on your roster. That's honestly the truth, that your best choice is to find, like, I don't care who, like, outside of a guy who hasn't been in the game, don't get Philip Rivers. But outside of that, I think it's somebody that's not on your roster. Maybe our backup at Green Bay would be a great guy to be real successful, plug and play, and he will do it. But I think I see the Falcons, because of Stefanski and all of their weapons and their defense, being very relevant very soon.
One more here for sure before we get to the Packers related hires, but Tennessee Titans, Robert Sala. I'll start this one off again too. I mean, I kind of think he's a solid coach. I think he's a good leader of an organization. I think they have some traditionally good defense there. They got Jeffrey Simmons. They got some guys on defense. My question is, and I don't know if it's come out yet, of who they've hired to be offensive coordinator, because they have they had Cam Ward, number 1 pick last year. They need an offensive mind in there that can shepherd their quarterback to success, or at least give him enough of a chance to figure out if he's going to be a long-time quarterback or not. Anything on the Titans fit?
Here's why you don't hire a defensive coordinator as your head coach, is because you've now got a young quarterback who obviously has a lot of physical tools. I'm not sure, he hasn't shown much yet, and all I can see is from the first season. I don't know how much he's shown between the years, but now you're gonna give him different lingo than he just learned. Right now, you're gonna give him a different terminology. You're gonna give him a different playbook, and what ends up happening. Here's the deal with Robert Saleh. He's already failed once, and it's an organization that he's coming into, to be honest, is a hot mess of a dumpster fire. Like, that organization is not good. I don't know how you let Henry leave. There's a lot of question marks on that
Vrabel?
organization. Yeah, have Vrabel leave. I just don't understand that. But and here's why it's probably set up for him to fail, Dilly. Because if they're good and their offense actually clicks with that new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator, guess what happens? It's no longer Robert Saleh. It's the offensive coordinator that he brought in. So that offensive coordinator gets a head job in 2 years, right? If he turns them around, or in 3 years, he's going to be a head guy for the next opening. And Robert Saleh's there again. And if he fails, then he's fired. And if they don't do well and he picked the wrong offensive coordinator, guess who gets fired? Robert Saleh. It's a lose-lose situation. I wouldn't have gone to that organization. I think Robert Saleh would have been a better choice for Baltimore. Obviously, that's going to some other jamoke. I have no idea who the heck he is. I saw it in the ticker. I think it's Milton or something. I think there's history there, but I would rather see him go to Baltimore, or Minton. I don't know who he is. Doesn't matter.
We'll get to him
But
next.
I think Robert Saleh is set up to fail there in Tennessee, and I think he will. And if he does succeed, it's because of the offensive coordinator he brought in. He's not going to get the credit anyway. He's going to be fired in 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of stole the thunder there. It's just best case scenario is Cam Ward develops, they look better next year, then they break out a little bit and maybe get 10 wins in 2 years, and then you're right, offensive coordinator gone, start over with Cam Ward, and maybe Salah survives that through another coordinator, but we'll see. You mentioned the name you were looking for is Jesse Minter, and that's a Chargers defensive coordinator. Jim Harbaugh's guy becomes the Ravens replacement, so a defensive minded coach. It seems a little bit like status quo for the Ravens. Maybe a continuity move. Tough minded defensive coordinator. Seems like that's maybe the path they went down. when it seemed like the question was what's going on with Lamar Jackson and their quarterback. So that's another one where it's going to come down to, are they giving Lamar either input or they kind of know what he needs, and they're going to address that with an offensive coordinator. To me, that's another. I don't think all defensive minded coaches are bad scenarios. And this one might not be because Lamar is an established quarterback, but there was some trouble on the home front with both his availability and his performance at times this year. So we'll see if they can manage that through an offensive coordinator. But normally, if you think of a defensive minded coach, you might want to pair him with a veteran quarterback that's going to excel with whatever offensive coordinator you throw out there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dilly. I think this is a very similar situation now that I think about it to what we just talked about with Tennessee. I mean, although I don't mind the defensive coach to fit into Baltimore because Baltimore is synonymous with defensive football, right? And maybe that's just me. I don't know that. I'm efforting a quick answer here. Actually, I've got one live off the ticker here. Brought in Coach Roberts. If you remember a few episodes back, asked him what he thought of the new coach. His exact words is a
Yep.
huge win. Knows the culture, the building. He's going to do well. If he picks the right offensive coordinator, we may break 500. So, I mean, is that an endorsement? Probably, but a ringing endorsement? I don't know. I think that we could probably see, and I would guess Baltimore as a whole would have probably liked more of a splash, maybe more of a name. This, to your point, was a safe pick, right? Like he knows the system, he knows the people, he knows the culture. So I guess I'm going to give this a solid meh.
Yeah. Continuity, uh, kind of a continuity hire. We'll defer to Coach Roberts, who, when you first started reading his text, sounded excited, and then predicted maybe over 500. That didn't sound too exciting. Uh, One last tidbit on the Falcons I forgot to mention. You know, they did tie for first place in the NFC South this year, so they don't have to make a huge jump to be in the playoff mix again in that sorry division. Last thing here, and then we got to wrap because we got an appointment coming up here in 15 minutes or so. Our guy, Jeff Halfley, goes to reunite with our other guy, the GM in Miami. He'll be a Dolphins coach, and I think we started sniffing around it in the latter weeks of the year. Were we so sure on Halfley? I mean, I'm not so sure. The funniest thing I saw on this hire, they had their press conference today, and people were like, "Are you trying to tell me these two guys aren't related? The new GM and Halfley? They look exactly the same." It's hilarious. I honestly thought that. I was like, I didn't know who was talking, and then I realized, oh, it is two different guys.
Well, here's the deal. I think Miami is searching in their head coaching search for a good guy at the podium, right? After the games, before the games, press conferences, they got their guy because Halfley talks a good game. He is kind of that guy. He's a guy's guy, so he's got a good report behind the microphone. Very similar to the two fellas that are speaking on this episode, which is why we got the gig, which is why
That's right.
my contract negotiations were a little bit easier than yours because I was really just looking for a home. You were looking for which home because you had different options. The audible angle is where you landed because of the big contract that you signed. I was looking for longevity. I have a 10-year contract. You're looking for somewhere else to go. So you signed a 2.5-year contract, which is interesting, but probably negotiable because we did start in October. With that point, I think that this is the same story as Tennessee, potentially the same type story as Baltimore. You hired a defensive coordinator that is now in a lose-lose situation. I think it's a mess. It's more of a mess down in Miami because you don't have as many good players down there than you do in Tennessee. I think you can mention there's a little bit of a core in Tennessee with a quarterback. I think there's a lot of questions in quarterback down at Dolphins country. I don't think Tua is the guy. I think he's firmly cemented in CTE. I'm not sure Tua knows how to say his last name anymore. But there is some questions there. I think if he's successful, which he will not be in year one, Potentially by year 3 he is, but whoever he chooses as offensive coordinator, which is probably gonna be a high school buddy or a college buddy or somebody that he knows well so that it's a safe pick for him and he still has control at his first gig. I don't see Halfley, and to answer your question, your first question, Dilly, sorry, I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but I'm not sad that Halfley left. I'm more looking forward to what our choices are for defensive coordinator in the Packers. Can we wrap on that real quick? I'm going to give you my top 3 choices at the Packers
Rep,
defensive coordinator position.
fire
My
away.
my position, my point, I think that we try to get Jim Leonard. I don't think Jim Leonard comes here because he turned down the first offer. I don't think he goes there. I do want to see Raheem Morris in. We had Rich Gannon in today in Green Bay. I think he's going to be here tomorrow. I also like, and I believe that the other guy that I really would like to see, but I think he's going to get a head job is McDermott. I believe that if Matt LaFleur wants Raheem Morris, he can get Raheem Morris to coach here because they're best buddies. They've coached at the Redskins together. They coached together at the Falcons. They have a history. I think Raheem Morris is the number one. I would put Jim Leonard as the number one choice in my mind, but I don't think he's coming. If we could somehow get him here in Green Bay, dude, that's a huge win. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Raheem Morris. I think it'd be hard to feel real bad about that. Um, he's got he's got experience. He's been a head coach. He brings a lot to the table. Jim Leonard. I think it'd be exciting for fans. I think people would be into it. It'd be interesting. He's had some tiebacks to some good defensive programs in the NFL as well, not just his Badger history. You mentioned Gannon. The thing I worry about with Gannon, I actually won't be that against that. It's a little worrisome because you have to look pretty far back to his Philadelphia defensive coordinator's days to feel good about it, and you kind of think, Arizona, they had a lot of problems. They had quarterback problems. They probably had some personnel issues. We did talk about those guys like to keep playing hard and losing efforts towards the end of the year. It just seems like a little bit more of a stretch to feel great about his defense. I trust the experts on that. I thought the other name you might mention, and I'll throw it up as we wrap here, is ooh, there he is, Al Harris.
Hey, we're getting